He was a lawyer from New England who served in the Massachusetts state legislature as mayor of Northampton and as governor of Massachusetts. He rose to prominence during the Boston police strike when he famously declared there is no right to strike against the public safety. He was nominated by the Republican Party for the vice presidency the following year and succeeded to the presidency upon the death of President Harding. The next year, he won a term in his own right. Presiding over a time of economic expansion, he opposed farm subsidies and government intervention in the economy. In foreign policy, he worked on peacekeeping efforts, traveled to Cuba, and opposed U.S. entry into the League of Nations. He left office and retired to Northampton, where he died 4 years later. He is our nation's 30th chief executive, Calvin Coolidge. Let's take a look at a map of New England and some sites associated with Calvin Coolidge. Coolidge was born in Plymouth Notch, Vermont, and that is right about there. And if you go there today, you can see the Calvin Coolidge Historic Site. It's a Vermont State Historic Site. And it's a recreated village. You can see a lot of the original buildings there. There's a general store, there's a church, etc. And you can see the house where Calvin Coolidge was born on July 4th of 1872. You can also see the room where he was sworn in as president in August of 1923 when they got word that Harding had died in San Francisco. Coolidge happened to be staying there, and his father, who was a notary, swore him in as president. Coolidge is also buried there in Plymouth Notch. The other important site in Coolidge's life and career is Northampton, Massachusetts. Coolidge was mayor of Northampton and lived in Northampton for many years when he was involved in Massachusetts state politics, and he retired to Northampton at the end of his presidency. He lived in a rented duplex until 1930 when they bought a house called The Beeches. Both of those houses are there. You can see the houses. They're not open to the public. They're private residences. But there is, at the Forbes Library in Northampton, there is the Calvin Coolidge Presidential Library and Museum. It's a small collection, and you can tour that small museum. Now let's take a look at some photographs of these locations. Let's take a look at some books in my library relating to Calvin Coolidge. I have two good biographies of Coolidge. The first was published in 1998. It's by Robert Sobel, and it's called Coolidge, An American Enigma. And the second is by Amity Shlaes. It was published in 2013, and it's simply called Coolidge. Both are good biographies of Coolidge. They spend a lot of time talking about the Boston police strike of 1919, which led Coolidge to national prominence, and about his economic conservatism and his view of limited government and non-intervention in the economy, and how those affected his presidency during the Roaring Twenties. I don't usually show things like this, but this is just a pamphlet for the 75th anniversary of the Calvin Coolidge Homestead inaugural commemoration. But it tells a lot of information about the Calvin Coolidge historic site and has some good photos. There's the famous painting of Coolidge being sworn in as president at Plymouth Notch in 1923. Now, Coolidge is the last president not to have a presidential library operated by the National Archives that's part of the official presidential library system. So all of the presidents after Coolidge, beginning with Herbert Hoover, are part of that system. So Coolidge's papers, as I had mentioned, are in the Forbes Library, in the Coolidge collection at the Forbes Library in Northampton, Massachusetts. Here's another interesting book that was published in 1973. It's Calvin Coolidge, Cartoons of His Presidential Years. And it's got some great political cartoons from Coolidge's presidency. One of the things that happened during the time that Coolidge was in office was the beginning of the carving of Mount Rushmore in South Dakota. And Coolidge visited the site and was able to get a bill passed through Congress to get Mount Rushmore designated a national memorial, and that helped to get funds raised for it. So this is a booklet from Mount Rushmore that tells the story of the development of Mount Rushmore. It's called My Father's Mountain, Mount Rushmore National Monument and How It Was Carved, by Lincoln Borglum, whose father initially headed up the project. Our next episode will take a look at our nation's 31st president, Herbert Hoover.